it's of value to you. And we'll know that going forward because we'd like to sponsor these going forward and let you kind of guide them as a member of us or connected to a species working group. The idea of this forum is exactly that. It's a forum. It's an opportunity to bring you all together in a community that has somewhat similar challenges probably amongst you. And we want to help try to either talk about those together and solve them together, or identify ideas and things for our future, recognizing that all of us are interested in recovering some or a suite of bird species that are out there. I'm happy to have some of our staff within Road to Recovery, Katie Holland and Quinn Carvey and Esmeralda Bravo are all with us to join us today. And we have about 55 people who have registered, and we're getting upwards to that attending today. The idea for today's forum is the first one we've done, so be patient with us as we go forward, is to introduce, you all know, many of you know each other, I'm sure, but to as I said, create a community around the idea of species working groups. And today we're going to use a tool that Tom, Will, and others have contributed to making. It's a recovery wheel that we have on our website, r2rbirds.org. And use that tool to explain it. Tom's going to go through it. Katie might chime in as well because she had a good bit to do with it on the social science side of the recovery process. And get you familiar and comfortable with it, and have a little discussion about it, to questions that you might have, or ideas that you might have, or opportunities that you might have to use it, and questions. And then also try to use that wheel and the discussion to identify topics for future forums. So we're offering an opportunity for us to do this on a periodic basis and let you guide the topics that you would like to talk about and guide. We're just here sort of facilitating that. And I will come back into this as needed throughout the forum to sort of facilitate the discussion and dialogue. And I welcome any of you or all of you to put your name and your organization and your species working group that you're affiliated with, or working groups that you might be affiliated with, in the chat. So we don't have to go through a whole formal introduction of 40 or 50 of you that might take up the better part of this hour. So you can start filling in the chat and we can catch up with that. And then we'll have some closing ideas about going forward. So with that, any questions about today that I can answer early on? Okay, great. Well, let me introduce Tom Will, who probably needs no introduction to any of you. And he's going to walk you through some of what I think is a really interesting and really helpful tool for an individual species working group, but also maybe collectively for us all to see how our progress is going in terms of recovery of birds. Tom, thanks for your work, and I'll kick it to you.
Sure, and I assume everyone can see this my PowerPoint now, yes? Okay, good. So as Paul said, there are actually two purposes of this talk. One is to, for many of you who are at the R2R workshop at NCTC, this will be a review of the wheel tool. And for some of you who weren't there, maybe it's the first time you have been introduced to this tool. It's a tool we're calling the Road to Recovery Species Recovery Progress Tool. Okay. And so I'm going to give a little intro to the tool and a little bit about how it's used, and then show how maybe it can be used to stimulate the group for coming up with topics for discussion in the forum. the road to recovery tool, let's see, go forward. There we go. I hadn't clicked my OK to record button. The Road to Recovery tool is really a part of a gap analysis piece of work that Ken Rosenberg and Katie Holland and I principally were involved in. It's just one product in that gap analysis. And it's a product that focuses on trying to figure out a way to show how a species working group, and particularly a species, is moving forward along the road to recovery from being evaluated as a species in need of work to actual recovery. So it's just one tool in that toolbox of doing a gap analysis. And I want to say that there's a lot of work that goes behind the guts or the backbone of this tool. What I like to call, the details are really in the angels of the tool. And the angels were a long time in development, starting with a gap analysis that Henry Stevens and Anna Lellismith started, and then different ways of conceptualizing a lot of the work that we experienced when we did the first 3 workshops for Road to Recovery. How do we move forward along the path toward recovering a species? What are the biological elements that are necessary to resolve? What are some of the social science elements that are necessary to resolve? So there are different ways in which we organize this material and many, many spreadsheets, ultimately coming up with this system of 90 separate criteria for evaluating progress. And these 90 criteria, again, emanating from that previous work, were then moved into a system of categorizing 8 major progress activities, and then each of those divided into 3. And the idea for this came from Hero Walker, who really said, hey, there's this great tool that the Society for Ecological Restoration came up with called the 5-Star Recovery Tool. And it's designed, obviously, for ecological restoration and has various categories associated with that. But this graphic way of presenting progress seemed to resonate with folks. So what we did in Road to Recovery was adapt that to the framework, which had evolved over time, again, through that gap analysis work in our original workshops, into a system that fit well with R2R and the idea of doing individual recovery work with individual species. So the structure of the wheel, as you could see, is that there's 6 major categories. All are action categories: organizing a network, moving toward identifying vulnerability, identifying focus areas, identifying challenges, both at the landscape level and at the micro level, strategizing how to do recovery, and then implementing action. And so what happens when you use the wheel is that you can fill in various parts of this wheel in terms of how a working group is moving forward with its species. And I should point out that the wheel is designed to be progressive. That is to say, you start with organizing a network and you move toward assessing a species population. And within each of those action categories, there's a progressive movement clockwise around the wheel, and also within a category or within a segment from level 1 to level 5, moving from the center outward. So the 90 criteria are organized in this framework of 6 divided into 3 divided into 5. And a species working group can assess its progress by filling in where it thinks it stands. And this is intended to be a self-assessment by species working group, where it stands along the road to recovery as expressed in the wheel. And an example of say a biological assessment would be how migratory connectivity is established, where demographics fall. But one of the aspects of Road to Recovery that we feel is super important is that we're trying to incorporate a lot of social science and human dimensions into our understanding of progress toward recovery. And you can see in this example, the individual criteria that are either essential that for social science to be involved, or highly recommended, or where social science or human dimension guidance is extremely useful. For example, you can see in organizing a network, almost all the criteria segments are filled in because social science would be so important in that part of the work. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, another aspect of the wheel which I want to highlight is that in terms of the dialogue that we've often had between individual species work and ecosystem or multi-species work, the wheel also deliberately incorporates criteria that are reflective of work at ecosystem scales. So the wheel can be useful not just for individual species evaluation, but also for groups that are working on several species at a time, and particularly to look at in terms of broad scale landscape challenges that will be useful for any working group to work with partners that address those broad landscape challenges. Those criteria or elements are also incorporated in the wheel. And also in reflecting our previous work with international partnerships and our international workshops, there is definitely elements within the framework that incorporate ideas of inclusivity and the search for traditional ecological knowledge, the ability to recognize the contributions of the global South and partners that may not be reflected in the traditional work that's published in English in the global North. So all these are some examples of those specific criteria that would be incorporated in the wheel. And going back to the idea of the backbone or the guts of the wheel, these are the various criteria. And when you download, when a working group downloads the wheel from our website, you can see that this is the framework that a team can begin to work with. Progress along each of these criteria, and there are 90 of them, can be assessed on a level of 0, 1, or 2. 1 being just starting out, 2 being actually accomplished. In a recent meeting, this is in addition to the tool from what was presented at the R2R workshop at NCTC, because in working with the yellow-billed cuckoo working group, Western yellow-billed cuckoo working group on using the wheel, that group felt it would be really helpful. Well, we're really not fully, we don't really fully satisfy that particular criteria, but we're working on it. So it would be nice to have an intermediate level. And so what a working group does is fill out this tab on the worksheet with either 1s or 2s, and then in the next tab, by clicking on updating the recovery wheel, the recovery wheel is automatically populated with colors that reflect those numbers. There's also a numeral 9, which would be used for a group that says, well, we just got some money, for example, to work on migratory connectivity, and we satisfied criteria, the second and third criteria in that migratory connectivity segment as a result of receiving this grant. So the purple color then coded with 9 can be used to show progress as a result of grant received or money received to do that work. You can see the light color of blue is reflective of just maybe starting to get work done on a particular criteria, and the dark color is where the working group feels that criteria has been fully met. the wheel is also iterative. So it's very, very possible that a working group might work all the way around the wheel. And we encourage adaptive management or adaptive research projects um, where ideas or about limiting factors could be tested in an adaptive way, and maybe a particular idea for a limiting factor that that isn't doesn't pan out after research is done. So it may be necessary to cycle around the wheel again to evaluate new limiting factors, or perhaps to involve additional people from other areas or other parts of the geography of the species to work on a problem. So I want to reinforce the idea that there's definitely an iterative aspect to the wheel, and the idea is when a working group is working with partners throughout the range of the species, it's really building a network for change that may be mobilized for other conservation activities. So the relationships that are built and sustained through a working group's activities are really key to sustainability for conservation in the future, even for things that that are not foreseen at the present time. And this is really about how we build relationships as we do this teamwork throughout the life cycle, the full life cycle of a given avian species. As has been, Paul sent out a link to our website. You can download the wheel and instructions for using the wheel from the website. The first tab in the Excel file, which contains all the macros for generating the wheel and the 90 criteria, has a tab but has instructions, and the instructions can be downloaded independently as well. So that's all I have right now on my introduction as far as the wheel and the use of the wheel. And I want to talk a little bit about how it might be useful to the group in terms of coming up with topics for a discussion in the forum. But I want to pause for a minute before we do that and see if there are any questions about the wheel itself or its use that folks have.
Questions from anybody or comments about it? I mean, again, thanks to Tom, Katie, Ken, and a host of other folks who sort of grown this over time, but in particular have really put it together. Questions? Will it be useful for your species working group?
This is Kathy Wise, and I think it will be useful for the yellow-billed cuckoo working group. And I have a question. It might be a little silly, but I like this tool. I just wondered if y'all had come up with kind of the best way to populate it.
That's a good question. And I think our recommendation would, in my opinion, the tool is really useful both in giving a working group an idea of where it might stand along those 90 criteria, but even more important, that the tool is a way to generate conversation around some of those criteria themselves. So I think it's really, given that, I think it's really important for the group to figure out, a working group to figure out a way to use the evaluation cooperatively and collectively. You know, and I think there are various models that people could try, maybe because it involves a lot of discussion. Maybe a steering committee or a small group of people could work through the tool and talk about it and do an initial evaluation, and then bring it back to the working group in a meeting and present it. Or maybe there are certain elements in the wheel that are sticking points for people that are harder to work on or require more discussion, and maybe just those elements or criteria could be talked about in a working group meeting. So I think the way we're the R2R leadership is envisioning people using this tool is kind of on an individual basis with each working group. Each working group is a little bit different. We're working with the Yellow-billed Cuckoo working group, and we did a session with them and talked about how they might best be able to proceed. I think it may be different for every group, but I think it's important for the group to make those decisions about how they want to proceed. That's my opinion.
Awesome.
Kathy, it's a very good question, actually. How do we involve people in doing this progress review or progress evaluation? And again, the idea of the different criteria is, to help people think about things that they might not have thought about when they were starting out with their work on a particular species.
And I see in the chat some suggestions or some other thoughts. So keep looking through the chat as you go forward. And we are really interested in hearing from you as you use it and adapting it over time and maybe improving it if we can to accommodate your or deal with any issues that you have in there in its use. Ken Rosenberg?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of comments of things that came up at the R2R workshop when we had this same conversation and people were asking questions. And one of the things is that it's a pretty overwhelming thing, this 90 different criteria. And so an initial question is, well, do we need to fill in the whole wheel? And I think what's emerging, and it is going to be different for each group, as Tom said, is that for some species, there might be a different pathway to get, to make progress. I mean, some obvious ones, if it's not a migratory species, you don't need to fill in parts about migratory connectivity kind of thing. But there might be other things that emerge, sort of an optimal path to filling this out that knowing some things will preclude. And we don't really know the answer to that. So I think that that's one of the exciting things is just seeing how different groups do start to use this and whether they feel that you kind of have to go through it systematically, or maybe there'll be these emergent properties of areas will sort of get filled in a different way. But I think the important thing is that don't feel like you have to fill in all 90 cells of this thing. That it's not an exercise just to see, just to fill that in. The object is to recover the bird populations, and certain areas of knowledge are going to be more important in doing that than others, and that'll be up to the group to decide.
Thanks, Ken. Good clarification. Russell? And when you talk, if you won't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself as we go forward.
Sure. Russ Norvell, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, non-game avian program coordinator. I get to serve on a number of working groups. It's one of our favorite tools, I guess, to a point. And I had a question for the folks who would help to devise the wheel. We've been through a kind of a parallel process with structured decision-making, formal process with the Rosenfinch working group, which proved quite useful. And it seems like there's an opportunity here for those two processes to inform whether, back to Ken's point about where do you start? Do you need to fill all this in? I mean, they can be, I wonder what you all think about how those two approaches could be used in conjunction.
Another good question. And I mean, I think the structured decision-making process or decision analysis is really useful for helping groups to think through what their objectives are, what their values are, and when they need to make decisions among various alternative choices, then structured decisions value really comes to the forefront. So, for example, in working through the wheel after limiting factors or landscape level threats or landscape level challenges have been identified, and a group is starting to think about what the strategies might be to address those, they might come up with 5 or 6 different possibilities. Do we begin working in area A? Do we begin working in area C? What do we do first? Do we do a combination of things? And those would be, I think, commensurate with alternative strategies in a structured decision analysis. So I think that using the tools of decision analysis at various points as people go through the wheel would really be helpful. Another schema which a lot of people use are the standards for the practice of conservation. And there are various tools in particular that the standards for that conservation standards or open standards use. And those are actually mentioned specifically within the wheel as helpful points where an OCS, where an open standards approach might be helpful. So I think using any one of those, any tools that help a group understand its priorities or its workflow would be useful. And I think the wheel is sort of meant to be used alongside that, but maybe to suggest other areas of attention that are unique to the R2R approach, mostly co-production type ideas and incorporating social science along the way, and where that might take place. I don't. That's my answer to your question, Russell. It's a good one. You know, we have many ways of approaching and evaluating and guiding us what's the right path to take.
In the chat, I'll bring up Mike Green's question about translation into Spanish and French. And I don't believe we've done that. It is our intent to do that. Esmeralda, maybe you could answer that for us, where that is in our work plan.
Yeah, I remember we have to talk with Tom about it, and we are planning to make a recording of this video with Spanish translation. And we are also planning to, this forum will serve as the introduction to this tool. The recording will have transcripts or also into Spanish. And we'll be working on the, as any editing we'll do on the website, we also doing into Spanish. So the Spanish version of this section on the website will be translated also into Spanish.
Great. Thanks, Esmeralda. And we, Mike, to take it one step further, we really haven't dealt with the notion of a French version of any of our work yet. We understand that to be important in Canada, but we haven't taken that step yet. So it's on the horizon. But any other questions or comments?
I mean, the idea, I think the idea of Spanish translation is really critical. Like translating those 98 elements from English to Spanish will take a lot of work. And obviously it started in English, and I think what I'd like as many groups as possible to try to use the wheel, and so we get a feel for how it's working, because there obviously are going to be modifications and changes as we move into the future. And the instructions for using the wheel does allow for, there's a column in the Excel spreadsheet where a group that's working on it can say, this, I don't know, I don't understand this criteria. I don't have any idea what it refers to, or here's how we think we meet this criteria, which is a little different than the way in which whatever comments a group has can go right into that spreadsheet. And, before you decide to push the button and send it to us send it to the R2R email link so that we can evaluate that feedback and think about moving forward and making changes. But I think using it is critical.
Thanks, Tom. All right. I see there's some other thoughts and ideas in the chat. So keep monitoring that on your own as you go forward. And go ahead and, yeah, place up either the wheel or something, Tom, that could be useful in us having a discussion about future topics. I think that would be really helpful, because that's the second part of our forum today, is to hear from you. I mean, we really want this to be guided, directed, and to some extent even managed by you going forward. If you think this forum is useful, we would want to know what topic to kind of throw out there for discussion for you, and maybe the frequency of it as well. And so what we're thinking of doing, have a little discussion about future topics for the forum, and giving you a chance to express your view in a quick survey that we would do near the end of this hour, that would help prioritize future topics. So Tom, you want to?
Sure, and I just want to, I'm sharing my screen now, sharing the actual Excel spreadsheet where the second tab, the wheel criteria tab, and just highlighted a couple ideas. So this is really the second theme for this presentation, not so much on how to use the wheel, but the topics in the wheel can actually be used to stimulate thought, or maybe there's something as a group looks through and reads through, or as an individual reads through these criteria, there may be something that comes up. For example, one of the criteria in the first segment is that the group has an organizational plan and clear rules of engagement. And what does that mean? What are the rules of engagement? And do your rules of engagement reflect values on inclusiveness and have a clear process for decision making? Maybe not every group has thought about that, and maybe some groups have a formal statement or charter that they use, and so that might be a topic for this forum. You know, hey, what have you come up with in the way of doing a rules of engagement or a charter? What's that sound like for you? And I think also, as you know, we talked a lot about the biological movement of in the early workshops, and so any one of these biological topics might be something that the group might want to discuss. One of the criteria is that for this particular species, natural populations, as Clark Rushing originally described them, have been defined. Well, have they? What have you done? How have you approached that? So this might be something that the working groups might want to consider as a potential theme for discussion. What does a natural population mean? I have no idea how we can figure out what our natural populations are. How did you do it? Some of these topics that are more linked to social science are really critical. For example, in identifying focal areas, one of the criteria is that the biological focus areas, as determined by, migratory connectivity and some sort of threats analysis, have been refined by including an assessment of what the human landscape is. Not activities which may seem very clear to a biologist may be completely impractical or impossible in certain areas because of the nature of the human landscape at that scale. And so, by adding that analysis of social dimensions into what's possible in a given geography would be really critical to a group's ability to move the species forward efficiently and effectively. And so, okay, how do we do that? Have you Golden Wing Warbler Working Group, have you tried that? Says the Canada Warbler Working Group. Well, we haven't done that yet. What was your process? And these things are things that I think that we have really great expertise in the form of Katie Holland and her team of associated human dimensions and social science specialists to help us move forward along those kinds of dimensions. So that might be a topic for a conversation, a future group. And you can scroll through the wheel and use this as a stimulus for coming up with an idea that might be really, really fun to talk about in one of these forums, or really essential. Our idea, though, is not to have the wheel necessarily generate these topics progressively, but serve as a stimulus for what working groups feel they might really like to talk about.
Great, Tom. Thank you. And Mike Green, thank you for your suggestions in the chat. And McAllen, can you explain yours a little bit more, your suggestion in the chat? And people, if you have suggestions, you can either raise your hand, verbalize those suggestions, put them in the chat, and we're going to turn this into a survey in just a few minutes. See?
Sure, happy to. I'm C. McKeon. I represent the American Bird Conservancy Marine Program. And going through the list of working groups, I mean, I admire all of the work put into the creation of the wheel, the creation of all of these individual working groups, but there's a ton where the working group labeled is none. And so there is no working group for a significant number of taxa, most of which, from my perspective, are seabirds. And so I'm curious as to the approach that this larger group wants to take for how do we deal with these leftover taxa that are not moving forward in the pathway that you have so clearly designated with the wheel and other mechanisms?
You've done a great job of explaining it. Now I totally understand your message there. And, that's a thing that we worry about a lot, see, and hopefully that maybe this group and that topic is one to bring forward. And that is, how do we collectively build a bigger community that is addressing, in our case, probably we have, I'll say it's a rough guess, maybe 30 or 40% of the tipping point species covered, but that means that there's more that are not in the none category. And you are so right that seabirds are a big portion of that, and it worries most of us. Ken?
Well, yeah, let me just make another comment about that. I'm really glad you brought that up, because we're focusing here on the use of this tool as a self-evaluation within working groups for these species. At the same time, within Road to Recovery, we're talking about using the whole process as a way of seeing where each species is and how many are at different stages. And that's the kind of information that's important if we're going to build funding proposals, or in the case of your program, and drumming up support. I mean, just that simple fact that you brought up, that most of the seabirds don't even have working groups. Oh, I mean, that's where we are. We're at the bottom of the pyramid for those birds. And yeah, so it's really easy for you to fill out the wheel, but that's not the point. But absolutely, and that could be a discussion for the community, for the forum, is how do we bring, because we found out actually that, as people started to fill in earlier versions, there's a Kitlitz's Merlet working group that I didn't know about. I don't know if you do, so there are groups of people that have formed around these species, and maybe they're not part of this community yet. And that could be part of what we do. So absolutely, we're interested in those leftover species.
Yeah, that's the word that triggered my confusion, the leftovers. I don't look at them as leftovers, as the yet to be discovered, maybe, or yet to be dealt with. Thank you. Other ideas for future topics, future needs? You may be aware that as you're thinking, we are in the process, with the help of some partners in flight folks and others, working on something that might be of some value in terms of organization, a sort of a best or better what do we call it? Best management practices, better management practices, or some lessons learned from how to organize and to execute a successful working group, that kind of thing, which would obviously be important for a new group just forming, that they'd want to kind of learn from some of you who have learned the hard way, perhaps, about how to organize and get funding. All right, we've had 4 or 5 topics that have been put in the chat and talked about. Any more? Lessons learned. Okay, Angela, explain, Angela Dwyer, would you explain what lessons learned about in what arena, what that might work?
Sure. Since you put me on the spot,
Oh.
I guess, no, it's fine. I guess I'm thinking about sort of the startup aspect
Okay.
of a working group. So specifically for mountain plovers, what I'm thinking about with the group of researchers and managers that I'm already connected with, or I mean, we're kind of a loose working group already, so we're looking to define that, codify it, hire a coordinator potentially down the road, to really make it functional. So just, I mean, that was the first lesson that I think a lot of folks have mentioned in a variety of capacities, was that you really need somebody who's paid to facilitate and keep the ball moving. So yeah, just kind of how to even get it going and keep the energy going.
Yep.
Maybe getting going is the easy part, but keeping it running and actually seeing some outcomes.
Great. That's very helpful, Angela. Thank you for, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
I just wanted to understand it, but that makes a lot of sense. And that's on the tail of that discussion about starting a working group. So that's awesome. So I think maybe we could, I don't want to lose people because we only have an hour, and you all probably have busy schedules that you're headed to in a few minutes. We've already lost 1 or 2 people because of that. So if Katie could possibly put up a list of some topics, these topics, and I'd like in frequency of this forum, etc. We'd give you a couple of minutes to answer the survey, and we could get the results there. She's already put it in the chat. So if you would click on that link in the chat and go to answering that survey, that would be really helpful to us. We want to, as I said, want to know what kind of topics to put forward in this forum, whether this is useful, of course, going forward. And the frequency should it be once a month, once a quarter, once a year? And maybe a little bit of thought about day of the week that works best for your schedule, time of the day that would work best. We're thinking in the afternoons, because that will pick afternoons in terms of East Coast time, so that we pick up West Coast people as throughout United States, Canada, and Mexico. So please look at the topics that have been put forward. Mike Green already put another one up there as a possibility. But we've got a list to start with. We just want to kind of have an idea what you want to do going forward. And so we're hitting the topic, you're hitting the topics that you want. And we're simply here facilitating and offering a platform for the problem solving. Katie, the question for you, I didn't, are you going to get results in real time right now, or is it going to be delayed, Katie?
No, they should come in real time.
Okay.
Should.
Good. Anything else you need to say about the survey as they're filling it out?
No, I don't think so. I just put in the chat that I can continue to add. These are by no means binding topics. These are just the ones that I heard mentioned today. So I can add to them, and we can distribute this to our email list as well. So people who weren't able to join today can provide input as well.
As you fill out the form, I just suggest that to build this, we really would like you to invite others in your working group or others who would benefit from this forum to join it. We really are only limited by the Zoom number that we can hold. That's 300, I think, within the Georgetown University Zoom account. So, we have 30 or 40 people today, but if you invite your colleagues and people that you have on the working group, they would be obviously welcome to join. If it grows in terms of numbers, we think we would want to use breakout rooms within these virtual forums so that we could get down to a manageable level number of people in a room, maybe 10 or 15, whatever the right number is, and so that you actually can have more chance to talk and dialogue amongst your colleagues and with other working group members.
And we should point out that the idea for doing this really originated with some working group members who said, we just want to have an opportunity to talk about stuff that we're doing and have questions about among ourselves. And so R2R said, well, we can provide a structure that will help you do that by providing a Zoom room or whatever it's called, and facilitation if desired. But if someone wants to kind of run organize a topic for discussion, that would be great. So I mean, it's not like we want to select the topics. We want anyone who wants to have a discussion about a particular idea to take leadership on that if possible.
Thanks, Tom.
I do have a small question for the group. Just
Yeah.
out of curiosity, do any of the working groups entail care for more than one species? Are there any multi-species working groups? And yeah, and could you self-identify if there are?
Yeah, I was going to actually turn around and ask you about that, and maybe that could be a topic because Brant is on, and there's an example of a grassland bird working group. And so I'm wondering that for the seabirds, if clearly there's capacity issues and you've got a whole program, does it make sense to start with a pelagic seabird working group that can cover multiple species, or a colonial? And maybe those already exist. So that's definitely an avenue of discussion. So looking for those commonalities, I don't think that is counter at all to the concept of these being, all together on a tipping point species list and all being important. So.
That's a great point. See, I would love that. I would love to have that kind of discussion around, because ultimately we as a group, as a community, want to be as efficient as possible, and where that could happen is certainly in some sort of convergence of working groups or dealing with multiple species, of course. And particularly when you start wanting to have coordinators, and you're actually hiring, if you're able to hire people, which I think is so important for any of them, is you may have somebody coordinating a couple or 3 or 4 working groups, etc. So there's some
Thrashers is another one.
Scaling issues. Do we have results yet, Katie, that you can share, or do we want to try to do that later on
no, I can certainly share. Let's see.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. So top, one was the top when you sorted them as highest priority. So funding and partnerships is averaging the highest, and you can see the rankings there. As a social scientist, I'll tell you it's more nuanced than that, because some of them are averaging lower, but it's because we have splits. So for example, what to do with the quote leftovers, we've got several people saying that's the most important, but several people ranking that last. So then it's coming out somewhere in the middle. So as a R2R team, we'll tease through these, and we'll talk about kind of the best way to move that forward, but there could be different conversations happening around different topics. And as Paul mentioned, we could also utilize breakout rooms and within one forum cover multiple topics, things like that. So we'll discuss that internally. In terms of frequency, we're seeing kind of a spread, but everybody's more frequent than every 6 months. So we can talk about what will work best there and distribute this as well to the larger listserv to get some more insights on that, because we only had 16 of you respond, which is quite disappointing, considering you're still in the Zoom room. Most likely day to work, I guess, is Wednesday, so that's helpful. And then we've got pretty even split across the times, which is what we expected. So we will do our best to accommodate for those responses as best we can. Is there anything you'd like to see more of, Paul? Or
no, that's great. No, you're really helpful. I just want to give them some feedback. Also, maybe begging to get more responses there. Then we were hoping for almost 80 or 100% response since we got your attention, but maybe you're focused on other things too at the same time. But we would, it's still open, so kind of please use that link and give us your thoughts. Add some thoughts on it as well. We really want to hear from you. This is valuable, and how often.
I guess I have a question for us and maybe everyone, Paul. I mean, there are a lot of topics and a lot of people interested in different topics. And as you said, Katie, there, splits. So I'm just thinking, like, even if we did this once a month, it could take years, to even discuss a lot of these topics. So I'm just wondering whether we had the capacity, if there happened to be a lot of interest and a group wanted to use this format to discuss, the species without working groups, and another group wanted to discuss funding, do we have the ability or capacity to sort of put this up at a frequency that people want to do it if they want to run a discussion? So it doesn't have to be just once a month sort of thing that we facilitate. I don't know if we're thinking in that direction.
Good question, Ken. And we were thinking we would try to help as much as possible. And we do have somewhat limited capacity, but by all means, it doesn't have to take a lot of time and effort. If others step up and suggest a topic and say they'll lead it, we can get the Zoom out and we can invite everybody, and we can do some of that without a problem. And you could do it at a greater frequency for sure. Before we leave, I wanted to give you all who are still on also another quick topic, a quick kind of a mention is we're trying to organize and facilitate a communication between species working groups and the state wildlife action plan coordinators. Every state has a SWAP coordinator out there, and we think it's important to have a species working group working on an important species of conservation concern for that state to have some sort of connection to a SWAP coordinator. So as they develop their action plans within a state, that your work is embodied in that state wildlife action plan. And so in the chat, I'm going to provide you a link. It's a Google Doc, and you'll get more information about it. But I wanted to just highlight it to you. We're just starting this process. We've developed a model letter, a suggested format for a species working group to send this information in a useful form and connect that to a state wildlife action plan coordinator. So if a state of Maryland, for instance, were to go to this Google Doc, they will be able to pluck out those tipping point species communications from working groups that that they need to build a better state wildlife action plan, and therefore help in the recovery process ultimately. So this is just we're just developing a tool and sort of a process to connect people and information. I'm going to send out more information about it. We would really appreciate it, and I think the State Wildlife Action Plan coordinators would really appreciate it if you were to provide them with this information. And we're asking you to take a look at the format, the model, and the example that has been put forward in there, and model your response after that. And if you're able to do that, we just send it to r2rbirds@gmail.com, and we will then be able to upload it into this Google Doc and manage that. Anyway, more to come on that, but I wanted to highlight it and get it on your radar screen. We are at the end of our hour. We've lost a few people because of that. Any last minute questions or comments that you have? Okay, so what I'm going to suggest in closing, as people start having to depart, is send us an email. How did you like this? Okay, yeah, Pete, go ahead.
Two really important things. It's Paul's birthday right now. Today is Paul's birthday. So we need to sing him a Zoom happy birthday. Everyone in?
Oh
Take
my
off your,
Oh my gosh.
on three. 1, 2, 3. Happy
birthday
to
you.
Horrible. Wow.
Happy
birthday
to you. My God.
Happy birthday
Birthday
Happy birthday
to you. And we also have to give Paul a great bon voyage and a 3-week trip he's been trying to do for a long time. So Paul, have a great trip.
Thank you so much. That was the worst rendition of Happy Birthday I've
pretty
ever
bad.
heard in my
Pretty bad.
life. But I guess you can't do it through Zoom. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.